I was elected as a member of parliament in Ukraine back in 2015, and since then I am engaged in the veteran direction. Unfortunately, I can say that our legislation is not modern enough and does not meet the challenges of nowadays, especially when it relates to a full-scale invasion of Russian Federation in Ukraine. We are doing our best to update and modernize the legislation. We learn the experience of the world nations in order to borrow the best in the legislation that provides for veterans and serving personnel, its welfare, social support during the service and after the service. Keeping in mind the long-lasting experience of cooperation with United States of America, number of projects of supporting veterans, service personnel and civilians, we would like to take the best developed by the United States and introduce in our respective national legislation to make effective and efficient in supporting our service personnel, veterans, providing them rehabilitation, social, mental and physical, supporting veterans, PTSD affected, family members, especially those who lost their closed ones and who sacrificed their most valuable, their life defending Ukraine. And while we are got together this time, I would suggest and I would encourage all engaged, all the stakeholders, US colleagues, Ukrainian colleagues joining via Zoom. So I suggest to get together as frequent as possible and offer suggestions and amendments to our legislation, and I'm as the head of a respective committee would do my best to introduce that to our legislation to rehabilitate our defenders as quick and efficient as possible. And I also would like to thank the United States for their support in these difficult and challenging times taking place in Ukraine since the large-scale invasion, and for wider support of United States to Ukraine. We understand that there are certain issues that taking place in the United States, but we do hope that this support that US provides would not be lost, and we will continue our advancement to that democratic direction. Thank you for the invite. God bless United States and God bless Ukraine, jointly together to the victory.
Proposals on a variety of areas, whether it's politics, security, energy, education, and whatnot. And at the same time, we are co-located with Bay Atlantic University and NECE, accredited university. NECE is the New England Commission for Higher Education, and we offer courses in social sciences and information technology as well, both undergraduate and graduate. We've just celebrated our 10th anniversary this year, and for whatever it's worth, since we are here in the National Press building, our building used to be the world headquarters of United Press International, for whatever it's worth. So that's a little bit of my little commercial, if you wish, about our organization. But without further ado, I would like to ask our panelists to give as Katarina said, short introductory remarks, and then we'll get the conversation going. Madame, let's start with you.
Well, thank you. My name is Phyllis Wilson. I served in the Army, United States Army, for 37 years. The key part that I think brings me here is in 2015, 2016, I was a senior fellow for the Chief of Staff of the United States Army. And we were asked, 20 of us, to look at what the future of the world would be out to 2050. And this was in 2015. So I traveled as a European expert all across Europe, talking with NATO, the European Union, and a number of other officials across Europe, asking them what they foresaw. And we got some things right. Some of those things we saw upheaval 2021, 22. We saw the use of drone swarms, which sadly we're seeing in the Ukraine now. Some of the things that we made political bets on that we then informed the United States Army senior leadership, we would like to believe was the genesis of Futures Command, United States Futures Command, which then is looking at how we can support on the planning and moving things into production far faster than the typical way that the United States military does business with the defense contractors. Secondarily, after I retired in 2018 from the United States Army, I became the president of the Military Women's Memorial. And I learned a great deal about military women that I did not know in the 37 years that I served. The 3 million women that have defended this country, of that, 2 million women veterans are living today. There are 20 million U.S. veterans, so 10% of the veteran population in the United States are women. But we're making up 20% of the currently serving. And one of the things that I thought was really powerful and compelling as I look at what's happening with Ukraine and what this means, ideally when this war comes to an end sooner rather than later, is when I went off to the first Gulf War, when I went to Iraq and Afghanistan, I went to another country. And when I came home, everything here was as I left it. There were no decimated buildings. There were no problems with infrastructure like what I see in Ukraine. And I think that's one of the key psychological pieces that we as Americans have got to incorporate into the lessons learned and the futuristic planning of how do we support Ukraine. They will have daily reminders. Now, for me as a woman that served with Joint Special Operations, there's certain smells, there's sounds, and there are photos that might pop up on the TV that take me right back to where I was. Those are intermittent. And I think one of the key things we really must consider, it will be constant and enduring. We really have to liken it back to the end of World War II and the Marshall Plan. And I feel like those are the kind of things that we must consider in the future in rebuilding Ukraine, is how quickly can we get it back on its feet, and remembering that, of course, not only have women supported their men as they've gone off to war. I understand there's approximately 60,000 women that are in uniform now in Ukraine serving on the front lines and in support roles. So I think that's really important that we capitalize and think about that to the future.
Thank you very much to our colleagues and our host today. I'm Peter Husey, and just a correction for the record, I left the Hudson Institute last August. I'm with the National Institute for Deterrent Studies as a senior fellow, and I'm president of Geostrategic Analysis, which is my company that I founded in 1981. When I went to work as a consultant to the United States Air Force, my primary job was to help them with Capitol Hill. What is Congress going to do about our major acquisition programs? And what I'm going to say today is kind of my advice that I've heard from a number of people I talked to over the last couple of weeks about we're going to set up a Veterans Administration, what you ought to take into account in terms of our experiences. First thing is don't copy the U.S. acquisition model. It takes us 13 to 14 years to take something in pencil and paper on a pad of paper and get it to the field. If the iPhone industry did that, they'd all be dead. And I don't mean that literally, I mean that in terms of financially. So you've got to be able to, what we call spiral development. As something comes in, put it back into the system. That's very, very important. For Veterans Administration, here are some lessons I think we've learned. Number one, let a veteran go to any hospital, any clinic, any doctor in your country. Do not set up a separate channel of they only can go to VA hospitals. What if they're 4.5 hours away from that hospital and they have chronic issues? Okay? And there's nothing wrong with having other people serve our veterans that aren't necessarily a veterans hospital, okay? Second thing you have to do, very important, the money you get has to be spent intelligently. Because the quickest way you can lose support is to have fraud. Someone stealing and billing the Department of Veterans Affairs for care they never gave anybody. And there's going to be a temptation. So the people who are responsible for going to the government and getting the money, setting up the budget and so forth, cannot be the people that are also the watchdogs. You have to separate it. Very important. It's also very important that logistics, otherwise known as supply chain, that you get the stuff to the hospital, the clinic, the doctor's office as absolutely when it has to be there on time. Remember the old Purolator cargo ads, is that it's got to be there. Because the last thing you want is veterans traveling to a hospital or a clinic and they get there and they say, oh, we don't have that medicine, or we don't have those kind of bandages, or we don't have this. Very, very important that you do logistics, and the secretary, whoever you appoint, make sure that person has the ability to say yes and nobody else. Just, he will then designate, you do logistics, you do finance, you do, looking at fraud and stuff, and make sure they have the authority to say yes. Because one of the things of the US government is we're so terrified of making mistakes. We got 100,000 people, all of whom can say no, and 100,000 people, all of whom have to say yes. And so nothing ever gets solved in this, resolved in this country for good. We can have a vote in Congress, vote in the House, 10 years later, 5 years later, it comes up again and again and again and again. So we don't put anything to bed. And that's one of the reasons that, as someone who worked for 5 US senators, I love the Senate. But now it doesn't do anything. Because as soon as you vote on an issue, the folks that need a dragon to slay, as Congressman Norm Dix told me, immediately your vote becomes plastered all over the internet, and millions of dollars are raised against you and your fellow senators who voted a certain way. It doesn't matter how you vote. One side is going to look bad, and the other side is going to look. And the amount of money in this system now, and so everybody's scared. I'll vote to change the name of a post office. I don't want to offend anybody, but should we deal with real issues? I mean, give you one example, the immigration bill. It was a fascinating way of hooking up a locomotive on both ends of a train and going in opposite directions simultaneously. It said the bill goes into effect if there are 5,000 arrests per day on the border for 5 days. But go to the end of the bill. If 5,000 people are arrested every day for 5 days, the president must declare a humanitarian crisis, and that means the bill is suspended. So they rigged it. And that's what the Senate does. We have to vote simultaneously to do the opposite thing all at once. And you don't want to do that with respect to when Ukraine, you got so many issues. The war is being fought on your territory, not very much in Russia, because Putin keeps saying, well, if you come after me, I'm going to use nuclear weapons against you. And so, unfortunately, we have basically said we won't give Ukraine certain kinds of weapons that enable them to strike deep into the Russians. So when Ukraine does, we say, no, you really shouldn't do that. They went after oil refineries, and then we said, no, you shouldn't do that. Well, if there's one thing you want to do is take money away from the Russians and Moscow, for crying out loud, go after their oil. Now, the problem is, if America was doing what we did previously on oil production and gas production, we could make up the difference. For example, Texas alone supplied all of Europe's gas at the beginning of this war because they had extra gas, which saved Europeans bacon, okay? If we did that rather than cutting back oil and gas production in this country and slowing down investment in the future, at the same time telling Ukraine, don't go after Russia's energy policy. Now, Steve Blank, who often speaks here, he and I have written a couple essays on this, is, again, the left hand is doing the opposite of what the right hand is doing. So you're not moving in the right direction on this. And the people who are suffering in Ukraine. If you want to take money away from Russia, for crying out loud, take money away from Russia. And 2/3 of their government revenue comes from oil and gas sales and oil and gas production. Well, if you need to go after that, go after that. We could make up the difference if we wanted to. But to go back, finally, on the Veterans Administration, let veterans go to any hospital, any clinic, any doctor in Ukraine, or if you want to set it up, if they go across the border to somebody else, pay for it. Give them the care. They desperately need that, and you want a system in which is very flexible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we now have a slight change in the program. I understand that there will be a gentleman joining us online. Am I correct? Or
I think they're ready, yeah, because it was
okay.
technical issue and they have great.
Okay, so this would be Mr. Vitaly Herzog. So that now I think we have the connection, and he's the head of the NGO Vilne Tavirne. Sorry for mispronouncing it. Is this coming up?
I think so.
All right, let's see what happens. If technology supports us or not. Okay. All right, sir, the floor is yours. We can see you.
Вас бачимо.
Добрий день, шановні
Wait,
колеги.
Okay, we got.
Мене добре чути? Мене чути? Дякую. Дозвольте мені, як
So
голові
allow me, please, as a head of NGO Vilni Tavirni Free and Faithful, I'd like to remind you our NGO is official lobbyist of Ukrainian veteran community in United States of America. We'd like to explain how we see our future work based on the strategy, how to build bridges policy on veterans in Ukraine and United States. But first of all, I'd like to tell you about our NGO and why we are gathered here today. Our organization was created in 2023, United Veterans and the protectors of our nation and volunteer supporters who care about the future of our nation. As we began our work in Ukraine, we focused on many issues of humanitarian nature. We wanted to support our military service personnel, veterans, and members of their families. And very soon we understood that humanitarian aid, though important, is not solving all the problems of veterans. We are not able to solve all wide problems that our military servicemen face. And so, very often, our combat brothers and sisters have come to us with many problems that were in responsibility of the government, but the government was not solving those problems. And we could see how fast our veteran community is growing and how exponentially their problems increase. So we need to find a systemic way of serving our veterans. If we don't solve their problems, they will be pushed off to margins and our nation would suffer a lot. So we need to analyze those problems and we need to form active position in developing veterans policy. Working together with our partners, we have done a lot of work. We have analyzed our legislation. We have discussed many failures of our legislation as it cannot meet today's challenges. We have also learned the existing governmental policy to integrate and rehabilitate our veterans. We have monitored civilian initiatives. We looked at international support factors, and our conclusions were depressing. We understand that at a time of war, our nation will never have sufficient financial and human resources to help veterans. We also lack necessary experience to um, help the situation at large and to organize valid support to veterans. That's why we are addressing international community, specifically United States of America, because it is United States of America who have built wide and comprehensive veteran support, and they could serve as a roadmap to support Ukrainian veterans and to increase cooperation for that purpose. So I'm very thankful to everyone who joined discussing and developing this document. And As a result of this building bridges strategy, we have amended our NGOs development and will focus on working together with American partners to solve the problems of Ukrainian veterans. We need to start with advocacy of uh, legal drafts to build comprehensive legislation in Ukraine to protect social rights of veterans. Majority of veterans are looking forward to social justice. They don't need government guarantees and social benefits that are outdated because government has no money to implement those benefits. At the same time, similar benefits are given to people who have not deserved those benefits. Ukrainian legislation must ensure a return of veterans to active civil life, and we need to take American legislation as an example. So, building bridges strategy explains this in detail.
Включення у ветеранську політику теми захисту прав ветеранів,
So let's put in the policy the topic of the veteran protection, which is now uh, is neglected, almost neglected by the Ukrainian society and government of Ukraine. It's a tough topic which requires, specific attention and greater attention with wider public. But through strategy, we build the bridges. And I think it's important not to lose time on inventing recipes, but use implementing Ukrainian American experience that proved to be successful. Our third priority is to establish efficient system of professional development. This component of veteran policy, in our opinion, is a key one when it comes to bring veterans into the full-fledged civil life and also engaging their potential in rebuilding our country, developing economy, and restoring the economical democratic principles of political life, and as such, integration of Ukraine into European and domain. So U.S. experience has will help to use the solidarity approach. I do hope that, but using the support of our American partners, we will manage to develop and implement the roadmap for Ukraine veterans. It would help them to plan their civil career before the retirement from the armed forces of Ukraine, and also develop the business strategy and specifically in such industries as medical, construction, and defense. One, it will help veterans to effectively use their knowledge and experience that they have gained during the service with the armed forces of Ukraine. So, I would like to reassure that we will never stop. And strategy is just important to have a cooperation, and this cooperation has to be filled with the content. So through this cooperation, our veterans will be able to get back to civil life and make significant impact into development of their communities in the future of Ukraine. I'm sure that the recommendations has laid a foundation for development of the real and multi-vector and long-term cooperation between Ukraine and the United States of America. In veteran policy and veteran issues, I would like to thank all the participants of the conference, our partners in the United States of America for supporting Ukraine. It's such a difficult times, and I do hope for mutual cooperation and your support that we in the democratic countries in the democratic world could have in could could have could protect our country from the enemy and protect the entire democratic world to prevent from happening what is happening right now in Ukraine. I'd like to thank every one of you. Glory to Ukraine.
Okay. Well, thank you. I am reminded, thank you so much for clarifying, obviously, all these important matters. Clearly, there's a, just if I can point at the obvious, you know, in Ukraine, we're talking about veterans, but there's a war going on. So are these veterans, as in people who've done and never going to be called again into active duty? Who knows? There seems to be, from what we read, you know, a penury, not enough people serving in the military, in the active military right now. So it's not like we had a war, it's over, and now let's take care of our veterans. The war is still on. And as we were reminded, veterans go back to places that show the devastation of the war ongoing. The bombings by the Russians continue, missile attacks, drone attacks, you know, disruption of infrastructure and all that. That doesn't make it for an easy, you know, re-entering of civilian life. Somebody say, okay, I served my country, I'm done. Now I want a nice job in a comfortable place and rebuild my life and do things quietly. I don't think so. It's not possible because the war, unfortunately, is still ongoing. Again, I'm just pointing out at the obvious, but this is a fundamental difference between our U.S. Veterans Affairs experience and what, unfortunately, Ukraine is experiencing as we speak, and unfortunately, we don't know for how long. I think, yes, I'm reminded that a copy, a draft of the report is available for you, for everybody, for all the participants on the table. So again, I understand this is kind of work in progress, but it's a draft, and please help yourselves. I think in the next order, we've got Colleen. Yes, please. Floor is yours.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Colleen Denny. I'm the Regional Director of Europe with the nonprofit Spirit of America. And want to thank Katerina and Irina and everyone who organized and brought everyone together here today. So I'm a Coast Guard veteran. I served just shy of 9 years in the U.S. Coast Guard. 6 of those years were at sea on Coast Guard cutters. And on 2 of those cutters, so for 4 years, I was the only female on board. So very much understand what it's like to serve and work in a space that is male-dominated and is male-centered, just like veterans associations and veterans fairs here in the United States and really globally are male-centered. So with my work at Spirit of America, I lead our team's efforts in Europe and, of course, in Ukraine. We've been active in Ukraine since 2015. If you've ever been in the country and dialed into Army FM, that is a project that Spirit of America started with the U.S. Embassy to combat Russian propaganda back in 2015. But fast forward to the last 2 years, have been working directly alongside deployed U.S. troops and U.S. diplomats to fill in the gaps for what the U.S. government, the aid that they cannot provide or cannot provide quickly enough. So this can range from body armor, helmets, medical gear, all the way to secure communications, vehicles to do medical evacuations, reconnaissance drones, everything that just can't arrive quickly enough or in the numbers that it needs to. But I wanted to focus my remarks today also as we look to the future of the eventual peace and victory of Ukraine. And as my colleagues pointed out, while there are about 1.2 million active duty service members in the armed forces of Ukraine right now, the Ministry of Veterans Affairs has assessed that that number could quadruple to 5 million veterans by the end of this war. So if we do some simple math, let's say about 15% of those service members are female, that will equate to 750,000 Ukrainian female service members that will be requiring veteran services after the war. And we have so many lessons learned here in the United States from our own Veterans Administration, but also specifically even from the last 10 or 12 years or so of when American women have been allowed to serve and fight in combat positions, first starting in Afghanistan with the cultural support teams. And we see common trends of the care that female veterans need, different medical services that they need service and care for, common traumas that they experience afterwards. And as we look at the 60,000 female service members that are serving in Ukraine right now, 5,000 to 10,000 of them are in combat zones on the front lines. And unfortunately, we've also learned from our own service that female combat veterans have the highest rate of incidence of military sexual trauma. And so looking forward, we have so much to do, not just here in the United States, but also with our Ukrainian partners, both in the government and, of course, civil society. We all know that civil society and nonprofits, non-governmental organizations move much faster than any government. And that's by design. So the advocacy and the networking and laying the groundwork and starting the work now for the eventual, as I always like to say, the eventual and for sure victory of Ukraine, we're already behind. So being here today is so wonderful to meet you all. I look forward to continuing the discussion with the colleagues up here and with all of you. And I'll pass it to my left.
Hi, thank you everyone for having me. My name is Dan White. Among other things, I'm a former Army officer and Afghanistan veteran. When I was thinking about coming to speak here, I thought to focus on what I know, and my wife and supervisor in the audience, they look concerned that this may be a short speech. But I want to start off by saying that everything that we are, everything that we will be is stored in one of two places. One is in the 3-pound network of cells that make up our brain, and the other is in the network of social connections that we have. And modern war, especially the type that we see in Ukraine, is uniquely terrible for both in terms of exposure to traumatic injuries to the brain and in terms of social displacement, potentially entire families uprooted for a long time, if not forever. So the first thing I wanted to highlight is that one of the most, I would say, underappreciated but most prevalent injuries that is going to come out of this war is severe traumatic brain injuries. About 3/4 of all casualties in Ukraine are the result of artillery fire, missile fire, so explosive weapons. And you can treat very serious injuries in terms of lacerations, fractures, all sorts of the damage that happens to your body. But the damage still remains in your brain. It's harder to tell exactly how that is treated. And I understand what this means. I was blown up in Afghanistan, suffered from that as well. And the effects are unpredictable and will last an entire person's lifetime. And it's something that the U.S. is trying to understand as well. So I think it's important that healthcare in Ukraine starts to keep tabs on blast exposures in particular, something that the U.S. is trying to do to create longitudinal studies of how exposure to different types of injuries and for how long and what severity cause what changes. And I think there's opportunity for collaboration with the U.S. on this in the future as well. The second is the importance of social connection. So meaningful social ties, meaningful social activity, that's what gives life its meaning. And we're going to find that this war, in terms of the number of people displaced, I think is something close to 9 million people have been displaced either internally or externally in Ukraine. And when we talk about veterans serving within the country, a lot of people, when they come out of uniform, may go back to places that they did not grow up, places that they don't have strong social connections. They're going to need to get reintegrated potentially into new communities. One of the things that we know is that or studies have suggested is that the rate of mental health issues tends to go up from active duty when a person becomes leaves active duty and either enters the reserve or becomes a veteran. So active duty tends to have lower rates of mental health, mental illness. Reservists have higher, and veterans tend to have somewhere around the same. So within that is just this idea that there is a buffering effect to having strong relationships that you have when you're in the military. And then when you lose that, if there's not something strong that replaces that, you potentially are at risk of developing mental illness at some point in life. So it's important to consider the ways in which people who are both come out of this war physically able and also severely wounded to have opportunities to participate in their community and to participate in meaningful recreation. So those are some things that I think we have learned with this present generation of veterans in the US, and there will be opportunities in Ukraine as well. Some veterans organizations to highlight that I think are worth noting that have come out of this generation of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan are veterans that participate in community service organizations such as the Mission Continues, organizations that participate in disaster relief such as Team Rubicon, and organizations that bring together service members and civilians to participate in recreational activities such as Team Red, White, and Blue. So these are certain things that Ukraine should consider in the future, and one of the things that Ukraine is blessed with is having a strong civil society that can host these types of activities. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for giving your own, firsthand experience, obviously, and thanks for your service. Obviously, the nation is grateful. Although these wars didn't turn out to be probably what we hoped they would, but service was given, and a lot of sacrifice by you and all your colleagues and friends and those who fell and those who were wounded, and so thank you. I think we have now another participant joining us online from Ukraine. I don't know if the connection is ready right now. Okay, good. Thank you very much. And so we have Mr., forgive my mispronunciation, Oleski Ilyahenko, who has quite a bit of experience both in police service, peacekeeping operations, veteran himself of the Russian-Ukrainian War, and also having served in very important position as Deputy Minister of Veterans Affairs in Ukraine. He's got a PhD in criminology, among many other achievements. Thank you for being with us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
According to hundreds.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
When we are talking about, okay, first of all, I would like to thank the United States for supporting us, and it's very important for us in this wartime and Russian aggression against Ukraine. When we are talking about medical and psychological aid, I would like to point out that maybe we have here two maybe main pillars of this problem. First of all, medical and psychological aid in general, and protection of the rights of soldiers and veterans in particular, because sometimes we don't understand our rights and our interests, and sometimes when we receive some services, we don't understand it was correct or not. For example, if a soldier was wounded and he is in an unconscious condition, he can't react, he can't control everything that will be how he can be treated in some minutes, in some maybe hours and days, and only his friends and his chiefs and medical personnel will do something to provide everything for this wounded person. And if in 1 or 2 months he will wake up and will understand, okay, my health is good, but I have no any documents to prove something, to maybe to prepare some documents for the status of the person with disabilities, and so on, so on. If we're wounded and we remain conscious, okay, I can control everything from the first step of my evacuation to the maybe my status of veteran and so on. Because I agree with our previous partners who said that, okay, we need to understand the difference between general human rights and the rights of specific categories of members of military forces or women, service women, and so on. Yeah, when I was wounded near Bakhmut in 2022, first, the medical aid I received from the Bakhmut City Hospital, and altogether then was evacuated by military bus to Dnipro City Hospital, then in 5 days by military special evacuation train to western part of Ukraine in one of the hospital of a small village, and then returned to Kiev to Veterans Hospital, regional Veterans Hospital, and altogether it was 4 hospitals. All of them are non-military hospitals, and I agree with some of my colleagues today that it must be cooperation between state authorities and private and local authorities. It's very important, really, because we don't have a lot of hospitals to provide all the services for all soldiers and for all military personnel. And in this situation, when we're talking about medical and psychological support, we have to understand that first step is the step from the evacuation from battlefield. But during the evacuation by bus between cities, somebody must accompany these soldiers, psychologists and medical personnel. We have it in Ukraine now. It's very difficult, but we have it, and especially when we were evacuated by train for maybe more than 1 day, maybe driving and so on. It's important to understand all these steps: hospitals, transportation between hospitals, transportation between region, and so on, and especially if we send somebody to foreign countries, because we need to provide some services for the time of this transportation and evacuation. Because altogether, I agree with you, dear colleagues, altogether will be the result of this action, and in future, we will see it was correct or not, because I can return to civilian life and nobody will understand, okay, what happened with me maybe a month ago. But I said, okay, it happened that nobody helped me between these evacuation vehicles and transport and so on, because, okay, everything was okay in city hospital in Bakhmut and everything will be okay in Kiev hospital. But if I'll have 2 or 3 days of transportation, everything will happen with me, and I can be maybe twice injured because of some technical problems, and we have a lot of these cases in Ukraine and other countries. Nobody will prove, okay, your injury or wounds you receive in the battlefield or maybe during this transportation on the territory of non-occupied Ukraine, and nobody help you. And I have to find witnesses from medical personnel, from other military personnel to prove that I was injured during these services. And it's very important to respect all these rights. That's why in Ukraine, as you know, 2 weeks ago, the main Department of Protection of Rights of Military Personnel was created within the Ministry of Defense. And according to the action plan that was adopted by the Council of Europe for Ukraine for 2023-2026 resilience, recovery and reconstruction, we have separate program in this action plan of Council of Europe. It's called protection of rights of military personnel and veterans and their families. And as you know, we have Ombudsman Office in Ukraine. We have our members of parliament and committee concerning social and veterans policy, and Ministry of Veterans Affairs. Altogether, we can choose the situation. We can solve all the problems. And only one thing I want to add once more. In this situation, I want to reiterate that only together with the state authorities and private NGOs, we can provide all the services. And every veteran, every members of fallen soldiers and servicemen and servicewomen will have an opportunity to choose better services, or from the side of state authorities or from the side of private authorities. It must be choice, not something one direction. In this situation, we'll understand the relationships and the honesty relationship between country and private sector, and for the right of our people. That's why thank you very much for this kind of meeting. I think that we will use it. We'll use all opportunities and to win this war against Russia. And thank you very much, United States, for this assistance. And I think we'll again, and other partners from Canada I can see here, and from other countries. And I hope everything will be okay, and we'll win together with you. Thank you very much.
I understand that our next speaker will also join us online, and that would be Mr. John Kilmer. Is he ready to be with us? Mr. Kilmer? Is he there? Do we know?
Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, all right, well, good, sorry. We go back. So Mr. Kilmer is joining us online. He's a very impressive background and has worked extensively with various government organizations in the US and in Ukraine, particularly, as I see here in his bio, a director of the company. Kilmer worked with the Department of Veterans Affairs of the United States, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the Ministry of Veterans Affairs of Ukraine. And Mr. Kilmer is the founder of Valicore US and one of the developers of artificial intelligence technology to detect PTSD, and he cooperates with the US Army. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dobrobramski. My Ukrainian is not the best as it could be. I appreciate everyone's time today. First, I'd like to say, allow me to begin sharing with you a profound truth that resonates deeply with the mission of Valicore US. Our emotions shape the world around us. They influence our decisions, guide our actions, and define our interactions. But yet, too often, we overlook the power of emotional intelligence in navigating its complexities of our personal and professional lives. As the founder of Valicore US, I have witnessed firsthand the transformation and potential that lies at the intersection of emotional intelligence and technology. Our human emotional analysis technology, or HEAT, represents a paradigm shift in how we understand, harness the power of emotions. By providing real-time insights into our emotional states, HEAT empowers the individuals, the organizations, to make more informed decisions, fostering better communication, and drive higher levels of performance, human performance. But our commitment to advancing emotional intelligence extends beyond the realm of technology. We've recognized that there are pressing societal challenges that deemed our attention and action. Among these challenges is the urgent need to address defined treatment, rehabilitation, and the social support of our war veterans. In Ukraine, as in many nations, veterans form a significant and active social group, as Mr. White mentioned. Groups whose contribution to society are invaluable. Yet all too often, their needs and experiences are overlooked or marginalized. This is why our initiatives like the upcoming Conference on Veterans Affairs is so crucial. This conference, born out of collaboration between Ukraine organizations, veterans, and our partners in the US, seeks to address the unique challenges faced by adapting them to the Ukrainian realities. We can develop strategies and plans that ensure our veterans receive the support they deserve. Furthermore, by fostering the cooperation between US and Ukraine, organizations, we can evaluate the support framework for veterans and their families in Ukraine. This is not merely about adopting foreign practices and talking, but actually crafting a tailored approach that works, that provides the solution, and that meets the specific needs for the Ukrainian veterans, children, and people. It's not about the US, this is about Ukraine. It's not about me, it's about Ukraine. In conclusion, the journey towards a more emotionally intelligent society and a brighter future for our veterans is one that requires collaboration, innovation, and unwavering commitment. We can only do this together. So I ask you, let's embark on this journey with determination, compassion, knowing that your impact that we make today will shape the world for generations to come. I've seen the firsthand destruction of what PTSD can do. And I can tell you, Valacor US and our subsidiaries like Valacor Ukraine, we're ready to give our technology to Ukraine. So I tell the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Veteran Affairs, and all the ministries that are here, I will give heat to Z-Man and Zelensky and Ukraine for 2 months. That's how much I believe in it. Because I'm not here to talk, I'm here to take action. Our veterans, our children, they're dying while we're here talking. So I'd like to extend my hand to the Ukrainian people and our technology to the Ukrainian people. Foreign policymakers, NGOs, and governors, I want to work with you. We want to work with you. Yuri, our general manager, is here in Kiev right now. We are not leaving, and we are fighting with you guys in the trenches. And I'm going to stay right here with you guys until you guys receive the treatment that you deserve and earn. Thank you. Чекую.
Thank you so much for this very valuable insight on the importance, obviously, of psychological care and how devastating, reminding everybody how PTSD can be difficult to detect, difficult to treat, and what suffering it brings to people who have served and experienced it, traumatic experiences on the front. I believe next in line we have, and again joining us again online, is Dr. Megan Mubbs. Are you with us, Dr. Mubbs?
I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yes, so we can see you and we can hear you, and you come to us with an incredibly vast and impressive background. As I read here, experienced non-governmental and public policy leader, graduate of the United States Military Academy, West Point. She holds a master in forensic psychology from George Washington University here in Washington, D.C., and a doctorate in clinical psychology from Columbia University. A Tillman Scholar and George W. Bush Veteran Leadership Scholar, she previously served as a presidential appointee to the United States Military Academy, West Point Board of Visitors, and is a gubernatorial appointee to the Virginia Military Institute Board of Visitors. The president of the RT Weatherman Foundation, she leads efforts to repatriate fallen Americans who die in service to Ukraine, and the Movement of Wounded in Action, WIA, abroad for specialty care. As a humanitarian, she's charted relationships with the US government, multinational governments, legacy non-governmental organizations, and donors to project American values around the world. An extremely impressive background, a wealth of experience. Megan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I only wish we could be together in person. I'm extremely grateful to the organizers of this event for bringing together such incredible experts across a variety of spheres. A special thanks to Katerina and Irina for their leadership on this critical topic. So my name is Dr. Megan Mobbs, and I do currently serve as the president of the RT Weatherman Foundation, which is a US-based private operating nonprofit that has been doing work in Ukraine since March of 2022 following the full-scale invasion. Our two core programs, as were mentioned, predominantly focus on assisting American families whose loved ones have been killed in action in Ukraine and evacuating wounded in action service members in cooperation with our Department of Defense to our Tier 2 hospital in Ramstein, Germany. To date, we've evacuated dozens of wounded in action service members of the Ukrainian Armed Forces from 12 different countries. And I actually just returned from my 13th trip to Ukraine last week. While this work is extremely impactful and critical, the focus of my remarks today are derived from my experience as a US combat veteran who led a unit in Afghanistan, a former paratrooper, the daughter of 2 US veterans, and a clinical psychologist who studied and researched under George Bonanno, a world-renowned expert on trauma, and who did my clinical internship in our Veterans Affairs system here in the US. Taking a look at the biographies of others who are speaking today and just sitting and hearing all the wealth of expertise and knowledge, I do anticipate others are going to predominantly focus on post-traumatic stress disorder, moral injury, and trauma-related injuries such as TBI, as Dan just mentioned a moment ago. Given that, I think it's imperative that I speak on my research at Columbia and what it demonstrated with regard to distress in the American veteran space. In the seminal article that we posted together, myself and Dr. George Bonanno, it was entitled Beyond War and PTSD, the Crucial Role of Transition Stress in the Lives of Military Veterans. And what we discussed and what we found is that while only a relatively small minority of military veterans develop post-traumatic stress disorder, and again, this is with US veterans, American veterans, understanding this war in Ukraine is vastly different. But what we have found here in the US is that mental health theory and research with military veterans has predominantly focused on trauma-focused conditions, so post-traumatic stress disorder and its treatments. But by contrast, many American veterans, and by some accounts, most American veterans experience high levels of what we will call transition stress during the transition out of uniform and back into their civilian life. And so think of transition stress as a clinical sounding diagnosis for the sense of alienation many veterans feel after they leave the military or military service. And transition stress can encompass a number of issues facing transitioning military veterans, and this can then lead to other conditions like anxiety, depression, and other behavioral difficulties. But predominantly, this includes a loss of purpose, a loss of sense of identity, and difficulties securing employment, conflicted relationships with family and friends, and just broadly other general challenges related to adapting to post-military life. But really, it is that first portion, that loss of identity, that is critical to understand. And it's not as simple as missing kind of the adrenaline-filled highs of wartime service, though that can certainly be a factor, but more commonly, it's a nostalgic longing for the sense of place and self and a sense of purpose that many within the military feel. Dan actually touched upon the necessity of social connection, and this is right. So there's a phrase that many people hear called being lonely in a crowd. So this is an experience many veterans feel. Loneliness is in fact a cognitive state, meaning it's an interpretation of the interpersonal connections in our daily lives. So it's not the amount of people we encounter, it's not the amount of people that we surround ourselves with, it is the quality and the interpretation of that social connection that ends up mattering the most. And for veterans who feel alienated or feel as though people around them don't understand their experience, don't understand what they saw on the front lines, that sense of loneliness can be quite pervasive and quite profound. So my recommendation to all of those looking at how to best serve veterans returning from the front lines of Ukraine is to expand past a narrow focus on what obviously we want to address the traumatic impact of war for those who develop post-traumatic stress disorder or other trauma-related conditions. Obviously, we recognize the insidiousness and the necessity of treating those, but it's to expand past a sole focus on that and look at reintegration and transition stress as being at times more pernicious and more prevalent within the veteran space. Because as we know, transition stress in American veterans has been found to predict both treatment seeking, so seeking out care, and then the later development of more pernicious mental health and physical health problems, including suicidal ideation. And Dan just mentioned this as well. The majority of first suicide attempts by veterans occur after military separation. It does not occur when they're in uniform. And some of the most effective interventions have not been clinical. It's been a mentor-based approach, with mentors assigned to veterans as they leave the military to just help with the daily things of life and understand the transition process. Because again, some of the most difficult things are reintegrating with family and friends and then managing those relationships holistically. There's been a tendency in our VA system to use the treatment of PTSD and the diagnosis of PTSD as a catch-all. And unfortunately, this obscures and prevents comprehensive one-size-fits-one treatment. Trauma is only one piece of a complex puzzle that must be addressed. Reintegration and transition is going to be crucial for societal stability in Ukraine and broad veteran well-being. And so the development of programs and policies concerning how to effectively fold veterans back into the civilian world in Ukraine must begin now in order to prevent, unfortunately, what we're seeing in our society, which is programming that hasn't been developed and is being developed after we recognized that that transition was a critical portion of veteran well-being. So again, thank you all for your time today. I will drop the paper Beyond War and PTSD in the chat so everyone has access to it. And I am so grateful to be here and working with all of you to make sure that Ukraine better treats its veterans and provides the services and policies that they need. Thank you.
We have a follow-on here. This is a very long panel. We have still a few more speakers. So may I ask I guess those who are sitting here to go back and join and hear, and the other speakers that are, let's call it phase 2 of panel 1, Mr. Josh, and then Major Edward Echohawk, please to join us here. And also, we have joining us here, Christy Arnell. Is she here? Christy, please. Appreciate that. Thank you. And we are also going to have is he here? Yeah, but we're not. So we also have Dr. John Manning, and we also have, who's here? Is John Manning here? Thank you. Yes. Thank you. And also Christy Arnett. Yeah, we got her. And online, we got Valeria Voloshina, who will join us online later. So, well, thank you. Again, sorry about this logistics. Obviously, it's a very important topic, so there are so many speakers. Why don't we start, in this order here, in descending order, and then we'll have our participant online. I guess we'll talk last. Please, the floor is yours.
All right. Hey, thank you all for letting me come up here. I'm honored to be here, and I think that what's going on today is pretty fantastic and absolutely necessary. I'm Major Edward Echohawk. I'm currently an active duty Army officer. Everything I'm going to talk about is based on my experience, not representing the U.S. Army, Department of Defense, or U.S. government. So we've talked a lot about PTSD and a lot about trauma, and I enlisted as a scout in 2004, did 2 deployments to Iraq, got to be a part of one of the 15-month deployments where my unit got picked up by JSOC. And our job was, unofficially, we basically hunted Al-Qaeda on blacked out helicopters for 10 months. the PTSD, the trauma, the anxiety that comes out of combat is incredibly significant. But like Dr. Mob said, it's different for everybody. Some people are more resilient, and that's not a slight to those that aren't. But it's the kind of thing that we have to recognize that it's a cultural piece, and overcoming the stigma is huge. So we can have the most impressive, amazing behavioral health programs, but if you can't convince that soldier who's dealing with a lot to go, then they don't do any good, right? So we have to understand how to talk to our soldiers, how to talk to our warfighters about that, and help them understand that it's not a sign of weakness. If you believe your archetype is you're a defender, you're a warfighter, you're there to protect your family and your country, then the next step in that is making sure that you stay mentally healthy so that you can continue to protect them, even at home. And I think that is the part that I would like to drive home is how do we have that conversation? And for me, it came down to having a conversation with somebody talking about my why. I said, I went to Iraq to defend my country, protect my family, and when I came home and I started dealing with home life and financial problems and problems at home, and it began to compound, I became the kind of person my wife and my kids didn't want to be around. And so I was no longer the protector, I became sort of the problem. And it wasn't until I started going and seeing a therapist and talking through the problems and getting that out there and really kind of working through that I started to understand the importance of it. And I would say that, I think that there's a lot of value in commiseration through, sitting down and talking to people that have been there. So, you've been, I've been, we can talk through that, but there's a difference when talking to somebody who has a shared experience and talking to somebody who understands the psychological effects of that experience. And I think that's why what we're doing is so important, but overcoming that stigma of behavioral health, asking for help, that's a point of weakness, and that's a drumbeat that I will beat for the rest of my life. When you're a warfighter and you come back, it is not a sign of weakness to get help. It is a sign of strength because you have to overcome that to continue to be able to protect and serve. And the reason it matters here is because Ukraine is eventually this thing is going to come to an end, hopefully sooner rather than later. And when it does, you're going to have a lot of warfighters coming home, and some of them are going to have these problems. And when they do, they're going to need that opportunity, and they're going to need that understanding to recognize how to get help, to become productive members of society, and to become the husbands and wives and the mothers and fathers they were and want to be again. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, thank you so much, and again, thanks for your service. This is I guess I can't picture myself on a helicopter hunting, terrorists in Iraq. Thank you for your service. Josh, I guess you're next. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me here today, and I apologize for reading this, but for the sake of time, and anyone that's worked with me before knows that I have a hard time staying on topic and not diving down rabbit holes. So the consequences of war and its trauma do not fade with time. The impact can reverberate for years, decades, and even generations, affecting the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of veterans, their families, and the populations of post-war nation. Therefore, we must develop and implement solutions that aim to prevent or mitigate the expansion of these consequences and their casualties. It is imperative to extend our support beyond the immediate aftermath of conflict and accompany Ukraine to victory and beyond. This involves creating and implementing robust long-term strategies for medical and psychological care, tailored to the unique needs of the ongoing conflict in a post-war Ukraine. These strategies should leverage existing programs, efforts, and technologies utilizing the experience from experts, established organizations, and supportive nations. Now is the time to act, preventing, treating, and preparing the environment that will shape the future of Ukraine and the free world. Although much can be discussed regarding prevention, such as how providing Ukraine and its heroes with solutions that enhance operational proficiency and survivability may prevent loss of life and physical injury, and lessen the psychological impacts of war. But with REACH having a core focus on human and systems performance and data teaming, I'd like to discuss how I see data playing a key role in the development, implementation, support, and continuous improvement of post-war strategies. Abacus is a conceptual method of utilizing existing systems and technologies to create a strategic data nexus. Although initially designed to enhance operational reach and effectiveness, it can be utilized to implement and support strategies for medical and psychological care. Within this strategic data nexus, imagine, if you will, a digital twin of the globe or nation and a convergence of a synthetic representation of the physical, the human, and the information. Abacus utilizes what is known as the Maven Bridge to bridge the physical, the human, and system, and the synthetic, data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, to shape and prepare the environment and generate strategic impact. The conceptual design leverages an existing Ukraine Common Operating Picture and Situational Awareness Program, which provides Ukrainian commanders with real-time battlefield intelligence. The program aids in the military decision-making process to develop a course of action, to plan and execute those shaping and decisive operations, to reach a commander's desired end states. I believe that using the Abacus concept and leveraging the existing Ukrainian programs, both military and civilian, such as DIA, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, DIA, D-I-I-A, civilian passport application, DIA. Live UA map, their account hierarchies and historical data. This data could be utilized to converge physical events in time and information from throughout the conflict, creating a geolocated impact matrix that projects and depicts potential impact to an individual in relation to the consequences and trauma of war. This could provide Ukraine, supportive nations, organizations, and medical professionals with the necessary tools to implement long-term strategies to meet the current and ever-evolving post-war needs. In terms of Ukraine's service members and veterans, with appropriate security measures regarding service data, their unit's operational history, and other reporting metrics, real-time and historical, let's say a version of Abacus is implemented. Example of it in action could be an active service member returning from the front line with the individual entering their rest and recovery phase of the operate cycle. Healthcare providers and resources could be allocated to receive the individual or unit and be prepared to begin, continue, or refine a treatment plan based on the insights from the individual's impact matrix. The same method can be utilized to develop and implement a treatment plan for Ukraine's veterans. The Abacus could provide a structure to assist supportive elements in the planning, coordination, and allocation of medical professionals and resources. It also presents the opportunity for a continuous improvement model by monitoring the performance of both provider and patient, which simultaneously provides Ukraine with a platform to identify and mitigate corruption regarding to long-term post-war strategies. Through this, resource and performance monitoring, expanding to a bigger picture, an Abacus could be used to provide an understanding or to justify a need within Ukraine or to the international community. In conclusion, I feel that data will play a key role in creating and implementing a robust long-term strategy for medical and psychological care. In meeting the unique needs of an ongoing conflict in a post-war Ukraine, as the consequences of war and its traumas do not fade with time, we must come together to extend our support of Ukraine in providing care under fire to victory and beyond. God bless.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry, it was remiss in not giving you a proper introduction before, and you did not do that by yourself. So my apologies. So for everybody to know that our speaker has a pretty impressive background, having established an organization, Reach Tactical, and which has been working actively, right, with in civil and military affairs and trying to integrate these various aspects of civilian life and tactical training and civilian defense, humanitarian sector, and so trying to work with all these aspects and trying to tie the loose ends, so to speak. Thank you very much. So we have, moving right along, we've got Christy Arnell, and just a quick introduction, who is the founder and president of the NGO Ukraine Unlimited, an organization that started with a mission to support Ukrainian individuals, especially women, by helping them find buyers for their handmade products and other goods to supplement their family incomes. This initiative was launched in April 2017, that is before the war, aimed at alleviating financial challenges in Ukraine's struggling economy. When the war in Ukraine began, as we all know, in February 2022, Ukraine Unlimited adapted its mission to focus on collecting donations to aid individuals and families in moving to safer locations during the bombings and other dangerous situations in their neighborhoods and cities. This phase, while ongoing, is now gradually shifting its focus. I mean, we all know what's going on, what's been going on for years. Internally displaced people, refugees, people who had to go to other countries, and people doing their best to survive in cities that are constantly under Russian bombing. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you for that introduction. And yeah, I am the founder and president of Ukraine Unlimited, and we are continuing our mission and shifting and changing because of the needs there. We did start it was actually 2000, I think it's wrong on my internet or the website, but it's 2016 that we started our organization. And then when the war began, we started helping with the displaced Ukrainians within Ukraine with basics of food, clothing, shelter, things like that. And then as the war has gone on, and we also were helping with the military as well from the very beginning. We've formed our team within Ukraine with the Ukrainians there that we're helping with these efforts, and also part of our team is in the military full time. And so we were helping with getting supplies to them, as many of you have mentioned before, with all of those needs that are constantly ongoing. And we're working on getting those even now. And we're continuing to work with the displaced people of Ukraine, and we're also continuing to help with the military with the supplies that are needed. But our latest project, as we're moving forward, we're working on renovating a building and for physical and mental rehabilitation. And part of the facility will have equipment and physical therapists there to help with severely injured soldiers and veterans with loss of limbs and other injuries that require physical therapy. And the other part will be for psychologists to be available for various types of therapies, such as the one-on-one sessions, group therapy, music therapy, art therapy, outdoor adventure therapy, like hikes in the Carpathian Mountains that Mountain Seed Foundation offer, hypnotherapy, and cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy, and also eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is EMDR, and so many others. And the reasoning behind having both the physical and mental therapy combined in the one facility is to make it easier for intake with soldiers who might not otherwise want to go to a separate facility for mental care, but would already be there for physical therapy. And we're in the beginning phases of our creating the facility and would need funding from various places, such as government agencies, grants and donations, to make this a reality for us. So we are connecting with physical therapists and psychologists who are ready to help, and we have all of the physical therapy and rehabilitation equipment ready to be donated by another organization out of Ireland, actually, to our facility. But since we're starting this project, we need to have funding for our building renovation and overhead costs of running it. And we would like to connect with those here to be able to get some guidance in our process and make sure that we're doing this the way that would be best for the people of Ukraine and the veterans and soldiers there. I also wanted to add to our discussion by focusing on one specific type of mental therapy we would like to use at our facility, and that's the EMDR therapy. This is therapy that was pioneered in the U.S. By Francine Shapiro in 1989 and originally used with veterans who had PTSD with great success. And after some time, therapists became certified and began using that in the public sector. And also with success. And this type of therapy is being used in Ukraine since the beginning of the war, with soldiers coming off the front line with PTSD and needing to return to the front line or to civilian life. And I have invited a psychologist, Valeria Voloshyna, to speak to us specifically about their program that they have there in Ukraine, reconstruction during the war, run by Josef Zissels, who is busy today with the intake of several new soldiers coming directly from the front line with PTSD, or else he would have been here himself on the meeting. His project has over 10 mental health facilities in Western Ukraine, with over 200 psychologists, and 20% are certified in EMDR, where this type of therapy is being used. They use many other types of therapy, not just EMDR, but I asked her to kind of focus a little bit on that and touch a little bit on the other therapies that are being used at their facilities there, and the successes that they've had with their patients there. Also, just a connection really quick before I turn time over to Valeria, to connect all of this with the Ukrainian Veterans Affairs policy, we would like to see organizations like ours be supported in these efforts, and like they here are in the U.S., and these types of therapies being available to the veterans through the Ukrainian government. In the U.S., we have veterans hospitals that provide medical care, physical therapy, and mental therapy, mental health care and therapies, including EMDR and other therapies. And we would, at no cost to the veterans, and we would like to have those implemented for Ukraine, the veterans there. So I'm going to turn the time over to Valeria, if you can have her online on Zoom.
Okay, so this is our speaker online, and then we will have Dr.
Yes,
Dr.
and
Mann.
Valeria is a psychologist there in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine, at one of these facilities, and she should be there
Yeah,
on Zoom.
I can see her.
Okay.
Valeria, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Yeah. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, very quickly.
Yes.
Valeria, as her colleague just explained, is a psychologist in the project Recovery During the War from VAAD, Psychological Rehabilitation of Prisoners of War and Psychological Rehabilitation of Military Personnel. PE, Private Psychological Practice, teaching at the Online Academy, Academy of Deep Transformations, training students in the direction, specialist in working with the subconscious. Thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon from Ukraine. I will speak Ukrainian. You said me that I can speak Ukrainian and you will translate. Окей, вітаю. Я буду розмовляти сьогодні українською мовою. Мене звати Валерія. Я практик, я психотерапевт, я психолог, я гіпнолог. І також я на сьогоднішній день аспірантка Криворізького державного педагогічного університету. На сьогоднішній день я працюю з військовими, з вдовами військових, полоненими та їх сім'ями. Я працюю в проєкті відновлення під час війни, засновником якого є Йозеф Зісельс. У цьому проєкті задіяно понад 150 психологів, і нам вдалося допомогти вже сотням людей. І цього б не було, якби не фінансова допомога небайдужих людей з вашої країни, в тому числі, тому велика вам подяка. Але війна триває, тому фокус у світі потихеньку зміщується, і ми теж, на жаль, це відчуваємо. Але людей, яким потрібна допомога, стає все більше і більше.
And the number of people requiring help,
коли ми розмовляли взагалі з
this number continues to grow as the war continues. I will try to be brief, and organizers asked me to share successful stories. There are many things I could share, but today I'd like to present the program of psychological rehabilitation of military personnel as we work with veterans and POWs. We studied experience of many countries, but nobody has suffered what Ukraine is suffering today. We're talking about veterans but our war is ongoing, and we can learn from experience of American care for veterans, and we need to continue learning as we rehabilitate soldiers who fought in the war and now cannot fight in the war, but many of them want to come back to the front line we call the zero line, and we need to help them. People are burning psychologically out. They have PTSD, depressions, anxiety, behavioral and emotional deviations, and many other uh, cases that are caused by trauma, whether physical or emotional or both. But our soldiers want to come back, and so we want to help them restore and go back. We have chosen Ukrainian Carpathian Mountains as a rehabilitation center, a rehabilitation area. And I'm now working with soldiers that have been returned from the Russian prisons, and in addition to group therapy and individual therapy and art therapy, we also hike in the mountains. That is very helpful. As soldiers come to us, so they get through the screening to assess their physical and emotional states, to evaluate depression level, depression, anxiety, alcohol, drug addiction, PTSD. And we have not mentioned this so far, but we have huge problem of alcohol and drug use among our soldiers and veterans, and this is a huge challenge. So based on the data we receive, we try to help based on our methodology toolbox. This is a set of effective methods to work with
I'm
different
reminded
states.
that we need to hurry a little bit because we're a little bit beyond our time. So if we can just conclude kindly, because we don't have time for a longer presentation. Is that okay?
Ці техніки EMDR
These techniques include of Gestalt therapy and art therapy. And EIMDR method was mentioned already at this conference. We use it for individual help to trauma patients when patients are overwhelmed with emotions, with trauma. We try to help them by describing this event through visualization, through eye movement exercises. This helps overcoming trauma experience, to analyze it and to move it from trauma to life experience. Peculiarity of our program is inflexibility of methods we use, and we have done a lot of research to show efficiencies of our methods. So organizers of the conference asked to bring successful case. So I'd like to tell this case story. We have received recently 22
As we're out of time.
veterans.
Sorry, can we have to, we're sorry to give this hard stop, but I am informed that we're out of time. My apologies. There's no time to continue. Thank you very much for your contribution and for describing what is actually being done. Yes, she can send, the organizers inform me that you can submit the cases that are really important for people to understand what's actually happening on the ground via email. So thank you very much. Appreciate your contribution and joining us from Ukraine. And now we have Dr. Manning who is really, on the U.S. side of things, who's actually
amerikanskого
talking,
боку.
who can talk to us a little bit about
І,
what
можливо,
actually
він
is being
зможе
done in terms
розказати
of the supply of
про
care.
те, що
Given his very
відбувається,
extensive background, he earned his PhD in
яким
clinical
чином
and forensic
надається допомога.
psychology from Sam Houston State University in 2017 and completed internship and postdoctoral training at San Antonio Military Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas,
І
as an
також
active
він
duty
працював
Army
в Сан-Антоніо,
officer in 2018.
Техасі, в
He was, most
госпіталі.
importantly,
Він
assigned as
також
1st Brigade 25th Infantry Division
працював
behavioral
в
health officer
21-й
from
піхотній дивізії
2019 to
з 19 по
where he
22
deployed
рік.
to Iraq in support of
Служив
Operation
в
Inherent
Іраку на
Resolve. From
підтримку
2019-2020 he
операції.
was assigned to Fort
Важливі
Belvoir in
результати. Потім
2022
він
as an
працював в
operational
Форт
psychologist.
Белуар
Dr.
як
Manning
операційний
specializes
психолог.
in
Доктор Меннінг
evidence-based treatment for PTSD. We talked about this a lot today. Personnel assessments and selection, executive consultation, and statistical analysis in psychological assessment applications. So he can give us a perspective from the side of the caregivers. We heard a lot from those who need the care and what kind of care they may need. He can tell us about his experience as a caregiver. Thank you, Doctor.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be.
And I'm sorry, I have to ask you to be brief. It's not fair because you're the last one.
Understood.
But I'm told
and I
that we are
appreciate
really behind with our program. So do your best. Thank you, sir.
Will do. Good morning. My name is Major John Manning. I'm currently active duty Army psychologist. And my experiences are just that. My experiences, I don't represent the government or the military or the Army. I've had the opportunity to be a psychologist in the Army, working with people both currently in and as they're transitioning, and in a previous life, working with veterans who had transitioned out of the military. Given the time constraints, I want to hit on three main areas that I think are extremely critical. One, I see the system in a triangle with three vertices. One is the veteran, right? The second are the providers, and the third is the role of the state in setting up the infrastructure to connect the veteran and the provider, connect those that need the care and those that can provide the care. And there has to be a connecting function there. And I see the role of the state in doing that here in the United States. The Veterans Administration is that connective tissue. But there are friction points, there are barriers. One of the barriers is we look at veteran culture, as Major Echohawk noted. In the US, we have a saying, if you build it, they will come. That's not always true. One of the hallmarks of PTSD is avoidance. Avoidance maintains and continues the symptom experience in PTSD. We run away from it, and that might look like drug abuse. It might look like behavioral avoidance. It might look like alcohol abuse. Some way to numb and forget the memories of the things that happened, the traumatic experiences. How do we get around that? One of the best things, and as a junior enlisted soldier myself, a long time ago, one of my leaders normalized seeking support. Absolutely critical. It needs to start now. That culturally, socially, there has to be a normalization that seeking help is not just okay, because that's permissive. It's encouraged. It's the normal thing to do. Incredibly important. There has to be a trust that one, is going to be okay for me to seek support. Number two, the other point of friction is we have to treat effectively. If we look at research, literature, it's highly nuanced, but there are specific treatments that have been research proven, not proven, supported to be effective. And it sounds like that is already underway. It sounds like there's already a large network, very encouraging. That's exactly what must happen. But we've got to be able to connect the veterans with providers, with the help. And that's money, that's space, that's time, that's putting clinics, treatment facilities where veterans can access them. Otherwise, there are so many more barriers to that. Transition, as noted earlier, is an incredibly difficult thing for some. How do we smooth that? Let's look at the friction points in the system and then work to minimize those. Thank you.
Well, that was succinct. Thank you very much. And I think what I got out of this is there's no shame in looking for care, and understand that it's okay, and that people who will take care of you are understanding and sympathetic and can help. And please go and seek help. But on the other hand, the help has to be supplied where the people are. And as you said, here's the triangle. So thank you very much to all our speakers, both here, physically here, and online. This has been a long but fascinating panel that provided a kind of an overview of the problem in Ukraine and what Americans can contribute. I think by now we're going to take a break.